what I have come to understand is that if the conversation isn't the one you want to have, or if you're not feeling like you're part of the conversation that you're interested in, you go out and find it.
Hi, this is the Free Art School where we discuss what it's like to actually live as an artist, from practical matters to what's most meaningful in sustaining a creative life. My name is Mariah Robertson. Today I have the pleasure of talking to Farrah Karapetian, based in Southern California.
Thanks, Mariah. It's really nice to be here with you, seeing you face to face,
Yeah.
coast to coast.
Oh, yeah, this is a Brooklyn to San Diego conversation.
That's right. I'm in my studio at the University of San Diego where I teach. I also have a studio in Los Angeles where I grew up and spend half my time. Um, this one I use for storage and making things. It's less accessible for visits because it's in a university and it's up a hill, and it's also in San Diego. More of my dynamics in a kind of a conversational professional network are up north or further south in Mexico. So
But you make work in Los Angeles, San Diego, and in Mexico?
I do now. I mean, I got this job 7 years ago when I turned 40, right before COVID. And, it was a time in my life I had been on a Fulbright in Russia, and my parents both got sick. My dad got cancer, my mother had a stroke, and it was time to get a full-time job nearby. And this was the job that was available. I flew back to do a conference on the relationship of physical theater from the revolutionary period in Russia to contemporary embodied practices. I think
Wow.
I called it like Meyerhold to my barbarian. It was a really fun essay published eventually. But I flew back to do the conference and like help my mom set up in the house and interview for this job. And before I got back on the plane to go back to finish my Fulbright, I got the job, and it was a productive week. Um,
Aw.
but when I got back, I started this job down here, and being down here has really expanded my sense of place on the border. Los Angeles is home in many ways, but being down here, I'm able to drive the length of the border, and I have a cohort of people I work with in Mexicali, a really great group of women called the Archivo Familiar del Río Colorado, and we work on the kind of river ecologies together um, now. So yeah, my life is kind of in a triangle. When I'm here in California, I go LA, San Diego, Mexicali, um, and I've learned a lot about where I grew up, honestly, and the reality of being in a kind of a zone that really is never neither here, here nor there. It's both cultures constantly influencing each other. So I'm really grateful for that, and for the opportunity that it afforded me to take care of my family. But I do spend a lot of time in LA still. Yeah. You asked me to expand on the word artist.
Oh, yes, please.
I am an artist. I also write and occasionally curate, and kind of have become, especially over time, more engaged with arts management, I might call it, basically because of the notion that being an artist is actually working on, cultural conversation. I've been really affected by transnational exchange in Russia and Uzbekistan and Trinidad and Martinique and Mexico. And I, at some point, realized that um, these exchanges needed, first of all, to be two-way streets, and that I needed to make sure that if I was going, I was also bringing back a lot of the really wonderful people and practices I was meeting abroad. And so that's what I mean by arts management. But for me, that is simply part of the ethics of being an artist. So is writing, and writing is simply a cheaper way to curate, honestly. It's like I don't need a show, I don't need like a space, I don't need a, approval and a budget. I can put things together in writing that I think should be together. And I also think of writing as kind of, it's always a context for what I'm doing in my own studio. It's building a conversation around my own work, as much as it is amplifying work that I think is really interesting from either contemporary periods or historical ones. So I consider my writing and other ancillary practices to be, yeah, part of the ethics of the work. And I have had dealers tell me not to do so much writing. I have had, since I was 12, people have told me I had to choose. And, I'm almost 47 and I fuck it, I don't have to choose. It's part of me, and it's part of the value of the work. So
Oh,
yeah.
that's what I was going to ask, is if that was an existing practice before the visual artwork, or if you developed writing in a way to communicate about visual work, or if it's both explaining and putting a context for your work, and there is content like literature type writing.
I think it's evolved. I think, when I went to undergrad at Yale, and I entered, you know, undeclared, and I had always drawn as a teenager. I had never picked up a camera or been in a dark room, and um, I like to write, I like to draw, but nothing had ever really felt like learning. Insofar as the beautiful process that I think anyone who is like not alienated from their labor has, which is that one thing leads to the next thing, this kind of um, momentum that you get through rabbit holes that lead to the next one, where one project opens up questions for another one. I had never felt that, even though like I was a good enough student to go to Yale. And I was in a literature class at college, and it just seemed to me as if all the questions that were being raised at the time were repetitive. It was always the Christ figure this, and like
Mm.
romantic naturalism. And I was like too used to it. And I took a photo class, and it was, Yale in 1996 or 7 or something. And
Was the graduate program is very famous then for graduating a certain type of photographer, but it was very well known.
yes. And yeah, I was immediately like so um, excited by them, by the grad students. I was such a nerd. I would go sit in on their critiques. I would steal, as I advanced in the practice, I would steal their color processor because we just had a Jobo, but they had a real one, a machine, many of which, of course, have gone away in the world by now. But it it was so exciting for me to see the way I saw unfold on a wall, and not to be able at the time to lie about it. It felt so honest to me that like what went up on the wall was what people would respond to. And the teachers at Yale at the time would take the work off the wall if it didn't kind of add to the argument that you were building visually. So
They
you
would
really, sorry?
they would edit your presentation?
Well, it was a crit.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. They
You
would
know,
take
so
them off the wall?
yeah, yeah. I do it now, but I do it in like a California way with my students because I don't want them to be sad. Um, in California, we're a little bit just, and also perhaps with this generation, we're just a little bit more, just a little bit less, whatever that might have seemed like. To me, it was really helpful it was like when you're working on an essay and someone's like, scrap that, that's not helping,
Mm.
right? And so yeah, it was helpful. With my students, I try to involve them in that process so that we can all kind of look at what's on the wall and support each other in the kind of construction of a pathway through, and we can change it. So if somebody takes one down, we can put it back up and change another one. We change the sequence. Like I want them to understand this work as a physical object in the room, which I think you and I both use in our practices. But even from the moment of intro photo to like be rearranging. It's such a different process than the digital. So yeah, I remember that feeling very honest. And of course, over the course of the last 25 years, I have realized that art can, you know, be as opaque a process as anything literary. But I think that's what hooked me. So at the time, I gave up the writing for the art, and I really did nothing else in college. Um, and I tell my students now that the way I felt about it then, and the way I hope they feel about it, is that whatever they choose to do, it's the thing they would do when nobody else was telling them to do it. That's how it felt then. And so I have used that as a guide as well throughout my practice. When I turn to writing, it tends to be to explore something that's come up for me, but that I don't want to put in my work, right? Like I don't want my work to be didactic, or I don't want it to have to be the only artwork that speaks to this point. I think the first writing I did publicly was for the Brooklyn Rail. I was just doing little reviews. I think the very first writing I did was for Von Lintel Gallery in New York when it was there, and it was Marco Breuer's exhibition of what he does, the kind of cameraless prints. And I don't remember what I wrote, but I imagine I was trying to explore his methodology with respect to that, just as I was beginning my own cameraless work. And I don't even know if I had even begun, but in any case, it was an exploration of the physicality of the print, which is something I believed in, and the uniqueness of each photographic object. Um, Something I believed in even in college. It has evolved. The writing has evolved, and now as of this period of my life, it's become more research based, and it's really become a place to put my faith in particular practices that I think are kind of under historicized, um, which ends up also in visual form, but the visual form is so succinct and poetic, I hope, when it actually emerges, that there can be a space to open that up and be more kind of specific about what I'm looking at and what you might refer to as well if you're interested.
Do you do like when you're involved in writing, do you sit down and have a time of day that you dedicate to it?
Um, I wish I were more religious in any of my practices. As far as like keeping a specific schedule, I do like to like wake up, make coffee, lie in bed, edit something. But then I start to get antsy. I get up after about 45 minutes and I exercise, or if I'm at my mom's, I'll like make her breakfast or give her a shower. And then um, if I'm not at her house, um, I will come back to the writing after I've quieted down the kind of forces of the outside world. So if I can have that 45 minutes before I need to care for someone or write emails, then I usually have a better day. But yeah, I like right before this Zoom, I was editing. I really need to be doing other things, but I'm a little bit monocular right now on finishing a couple of things, and it's really hard to get to the mundanities when I have my teeth sunk into something that I'd like to wrap up.
Oh, yeah. Oh gosh, I have a ton of questions that go off in all directions. Like how many, this isn't on our list of things to talk about, but like about how many projects do you think you have sort of in progress at any one time?
That too has kind of changed over time. I don't know how that feels for you, but I feel like as a younger artist, and I noticed this in a lot of mid-career work, which actually really excites me about mid-career. I noticed when you're younger, sometimes you can see in someone's practice, and I do see in my own, these spurts of what they will mean over the course of their entire career, right? So you see these spurts, whether it's like quickly executed installation or video or photographic kind of experiments, and you can knock them out. I certainly did. After grad school, I was always doing a new project here and there. I'd get in, get out, show it. And for a lot of reasons over the last 6 years, including COVID and caretaking responsibilities with the family and a full-time job, which is the first teaching job I've had in that capacity. But also because really of the paradigm shift that the Fulbright constituted for me in 2018. um, I slowed down. I realized there was a lot of stuff I didn't know, despite having what is, purportedly a great education, Yale and UCLA. But I feel like I had this other network of artistic practices opened up to me that really felt like a family for what I had been doing experimentally. And I needed to understand them, so that I didn't just feel like perpetually, this experimental photographer. Like, it's like, there's this box of the alternative that modernist art history, you know, puts practices like the experimental ones that maybe you would describe yourself as having as well. Um, it's not a bad box. It's a great box, but it's always defined in the negative as an alternative to a dominant photographic history or a dominant notion of modernist street photography, whatever. And I just realized there were other ways to link what I do to the world. And I also kind of began to really want to trace a content thread for myself. I think my practice has always been motivated by narrative, even when it has always also been experimental. I address every project as if the material is a metaphor, but that metaphor tends to be driven by the content that motivated it. And so although you could do a show of work that takes as its premise only abstract questions, throughout my 25-year practice, you'll find that like I'm using this particular material entry point, because I've been interacting with this narrative and then this one. And so I I know that can be confusing to a market for sure, but I also wanted to make sure that I understood the thread, myself. And I described it differently throughout time, like the marks that people and time leave on surfaces or whatever, performative, whatever, embodied. I think one of my dealers, Tara, said, Farrah makes photography physical. But I really I really wanted to to see it as a link in terms of agency. Every kind of community that I'm introduced to or that has become part of my life otherwise has introduced me to a new posture of agency, and usually in the face of something catastrophic change. And their agency influences the way that I perform agency in the darkroom. So yeah, I think I have shifted the way that I work, over time to take a little bit more time to invest in each, project. And right now, I would say I have two major projects that are coming to, the end of their arc. Um, One that has to do with a network of revolutionary women between the world wars, and the other that has to do with cotton ecologies in Uzbekistan and Mexico. Um, and then because of those projects, I've met people who have asked me to do other things. So like I have something coming up in Colombia for the Bienal del Sur, where I'm working with a bunch of women who've gone through migratory and domestic violences. And, again, the content sounds so heavy in each of these projects that like it's almost like you wouldn't expect them to also be experimentally photographic. But the project in Colombia is a light drawing insofar as it's like burned burlap, and then and then the project with the cotton is, cyanotype on cotton rag, but I deploy the cyanotype with a spray gun so that it's a very,
Ooh.
very palpable emulsion. And then the Women's Network is at this point a book of speculative fiction and creative nonfiction, but it's also been videos with casting sessions, people who identify with the women. And it's also been photograms made from kind of constructed negatives, which is a word I use for any number of sculptural interventions that that take the place of the women in this case because they're dead.
Hmm. I'm sorry. I guess I was listening to the about the work and then sort of missed like where that's being exhibited. Like, is that institution? Because this is my other question is like, you've mentioned dealers a couple times. I'm curious about your relationship to where you exhibit and really in institutional frameworks or commercial outlets and how you navigate these projects, which sound like, oh, there's so much going on in them. But then, I'm curious about the nuts and bolts of getting it out into the world.
My last normal, is that a word I can use? My last conventional solo show closed for COVID. I have not done a commercial gallery show since then.
But you've had a long experience with dealers.
Yes, yes, yes. And all of my dealers have been lovely people with wonderful practices, and there have never been any bad breakups.
How'd you get involved with them in the first place? Is always the question I get.
Right, that's a question students ask, and more than I was given in my undergrad experience. I really do try to open that up as a practical question. I did a couple little shows between undergrad and grad school, but certainly grad school at UCLA was primarily studio visit based, and so you'd have people coming through. And I did, open studios one year. Somebody came through from a local gallery who asked me to do a project, and so that project then turned into a second project and then a solo show. So my first solo show after grad school was like a year after grad school with that place, but I had already done two project shows with them. And so I always tell my students to look for the project spaces at commercial galleries or to look, of course, for artist-run spaces, which was another of my earlier way of entering the conversation. But my first solo exhibition at a commercial gallery closed like the next month. The gallery closed. It was 2009, I think, and the recession had happened and the lease was up on the space, and the women are fantastic women who still operate as great arts people in Los Angeles. But yes, so that situation ended. I then went on to show with a couple of other great, mid-level galleries in LA, mostly just building on that momentum of showing in group. I didn't do that. I haven't done that many group shows. I was in one Orange County Museum of Art, California Pacific Triennial, curated by Dan Cameron, during that initial period of my exhibition history, and some other smaller group shows, but mostly it was like, yeah, like a group show at LA Louvre called Rogue Wave, where me and Matt Brent and a couple of other of the emerging artists at the time showed work that we had just made for or around the occasion of the show. But yeah, mostly at that time it was visits building off of studio visits.
In graduate school, you get a lot of them built in, but then it's always a
Yeah,
question of how do you keep them going when you're outside of that context. And if you work with a gallery, maybe they invite some people, but that's not enough. You also need to be,
yeah.
do you have how do you do, like, if no one's been over in a while, like, how do you get people over?
Yeah, so I mean that was definitely I worked with Tara Von Lintel for a while in Los Angeles, and I've done great projects as well with Diane Rosenstein, but I wasn't feeling as much a part of the kind of conversation that I wanted to be in Los Angeles, but I also didn't know what conversation I wanted to be a part of in Los Angeles anymore. And when I started going elsewhere and investigating these other conversations, I started to build up that network in a different way. So,
Oh,
um,
yeah,
uh,
tell me more about that. Like, what do you mean elsewhere? And then how you built that network.
I just think that, like, um, first of all, the Vending Museum in Los Angeles has been a really long-standing partner of genuine conversation and just opportunity to be creative around what I'm contributing. And sometimes that's also in palaver, in conversation with other artists and giving opportunity there. During COVID, we did a whole series of talks together with other artists. And then in Russia, on my first residency through CEC ArtsLink, I met Susan Katz, who now is at Flux Factory in New York. And with Susan, I have done like 5,000 things. And the network of artists that I've met through the corollaries of projects I've done through Susan, um, has expanded even more. So now I've been to Uzbekistan without Susan. I've been there through a residency most recently with the Art Station, Silk Road University. I don't know, but I met a number of really wonderful curators on that trip, and now I have projects in Amsterdam, I hope, in the next year, but not only for myself, but for some of the archives and artists that I've encountered there. So basically, I feel like what I have come to understand is that if the conversation isn't the one you want to have, or if you're not feeling like you're part of the conversation that you're interested in, you go out and find it. And writing is one of the ways I did that before I was traveling, because I can just make a conversation in an essay. Panels are a way of doing that, but they have become very, very just a part of market practice that isn't always as engaging as you want it to be. And residencies have really helped to expand that conversation, so that I never feel like I have to. Well, that's a lie. I do occasionally feel like reaching out and just asking if someone wants to talk to me. But frankly, that is more of a like default response on my part, um, that isn't as productive as going out and it's kind of like in dating when
Yeah.
it's like in dating they say just go do the things you like to do and you'll meet someone, uh, rather than going at it the other direction.
You
And I
can't apply for it like you would a job.
Yeah, you don't want to just be like, I want to date abstractly. You want to go like surfing, and then maybe if you're surfing, you meet someone who likes to surf, and you guys can surf together. So that's kind of been how I've let the process evolve I mean, it does mean that I have Zoom calls at midnight because these time zones are so insane, but so insanely different. But that's been how I've largely managed the expansion of the conversation beyond grad school, I'd say.
I start with one person,
Yeah.
expand, usually like talk to one person, and then you find other, sort of like pull a thread and meet other people that way. Just I'm just thinking about
Yeah.
it concretely.
Yeah, I mean, concretely, you can write, you can organize your own exhibitions at artist-run spaces, you can apply to residencies and meet people there, you can,
Yeah.
um, and it does not have to be like everyone on those residencies is your best friend. It really just means one person at each of these places or contexts is someone who you genuinely connect with. I am not a good liar, and if I'm connecting with someone, I think we both know. Um, and I've just never ever, I didn't grow up with like networky parents. They didn't even drink. And so I've never been someone who could fabricate a relationship. If I'm excited about dinner and a studio visit, um, I'm thrilled to be a generous critic and receive in kind,
Hmm.
Yeah. But someone said to me when I was young that nothing depends on any one person or relationship. And I think that's a really good thing for a young artist to remember. I hear a lot of fear in people around applications and rejections and studio visits that have gone wrong or whatever. And um, I just I just think it's important to remember that you're not supposed to have 100% connection with everyone you meet. You are supposed to find the people with whom you genuinely connect, and like good things come from that, not from being everybody's best friend, you know?
Have you had a studio visit go wrong?
Um,
In a way, I'm not trying to ask you to divulge anything personal, but
um, I can remember some funny ones. No, I mean, I think one of your questions that you tend to ask people in these interviews is around insults.
yeah, like repeat.
And yeah, I think there are things that feel like that at the time. They can feel stingy. Um, but the ones that were the stingiest are the ones that have stayed with me the longest as things I turn over in my mouth and register new moves against. Not that they were right, but that, I do consider the things they've said. Like there was one that I actually like to pull out of my back pocket when I'm talking about um, kind of the differences maybe in the way um, men and women are encountered sometimes in the art world. And I think this encounter wouldn't have happened with if I had been a man. I think I was like 28, but that's not the takeaway from it.
Mhm.
The takeaway from it is different from it was a curator who had arranged for a client to meet me. The clients had not been able to reach me through a gallery and knew her. And so we sat down to talk about what I thought was going to be a sale. And the curator said, the first thing out of her mouth, I was so confident and young, like 28, like, yeah, this is gonna be good. And and she said, Farrah, what do you want to do with, when you grow up?
Ooh.
And I was just like, I a little bit of deer in the headlights stuff. And then as a woman, I began to answer the question and like talk about how I was going to have small museum shows coming up and I was going to do this and I was going to do that and justify my practice. I didn't need to do that. Curator didn't need to say that. Person didn't buy the work that day, did buy work later, different work. Um, but I think one of the interesting things about that particular zinger was that I think about it even in terms of the question of like, writing versus artwork. Like maybe she meant, and it doesn't matter what she meant, but how I take it is like this question of how many practices I fold into one. That I'm not like interested in branding as a repetitive practice, and that I do, kind of evolve project to project and write, not on the side, but as a primary part of my practice. And I take permission from that zinger to, in fact, have already chosen what I want to do when I grow up to be this artist whose practice is otherwise than confined to one particular strand of marketable objects. But that's just one example. I mean, I had a silly studio visit with a woman who showed up with dark sunglasses on and didn't take them off. And then
Ooh.
as she was leaving, she was like, but the color of James Welling's work is so much better. And I'm like, you don't take off your sunglasses if you're going to tell me my colors. Not as good as my teacher. Um, stuff like that. But the more interesting ones are little things like someone asked and then deleted on Instagram once, what was at risk for me in a particular project? And I thought about it for a long time. I thought about what was at risk for me in that project. And I probably changed some of my posture towards that project or other ones. So you never know if what you're gonna say or hear is gonna actually be a productive comment. And I think here as a professor, I'm really conscious of the fact that like criticism for me is a love language. Like I grew up with it. Like we analyzed movies because we didn't have any money. That's what we did. You know, we went to a movie, then that's what we talked about. We analyzed it. And so it's like second nature for me. Judgment is different, and I really try to encourage my students to think of critique as a place of possibility, but we don't go into it with the preconception of good or bad, or even with that as an end game. We go into it with like observation, and and so it nothing that is critical in that posture has to be insulting per se, you know.
I really like what that sentiment, not judgment, but to analyze a thing because it's like part of enjoying it and part of understanding it, and that but being careful not to do judgment. And also like sometimes something annoying like crystallizes your response to it, whether or not it can be valuable for you, even if it's pretty insulting or irritating, it can crystallize a
Mhm.
sentiment that's out in the world,
Yeah.
maybe a
You know,
dark sentiment.
yeah. In grad school, Mary Kelly used to run this crit where you would spend a couple hours on a piece, and it was an interdisciplinary crit where you know, you would start far outside. It was phenomenological. So you're just feeling out the various levels of sense as you got closer and closer to the thing. So you would start outside the room where the artwork was ostensibly situated, listening, feeling like the various sensory informations. And then you would enter the room, and then you would, you know, get closer to the object, and then you would look at its, you know, is there text around it? Is it framed? Is it on a pedestal? And then you would get to the object itself. And then if there was content inside the object, you would get to that last. um, and it would take hours. And what's beautiful about it, I think, first of all, no one will ever pay as much attention to to a work again in your life as they paid that day. But what was beautiful about it is that like the sculptors, the painters, the performance artists, the photographers, they all could read a work if they paid that much attention to it. You know, nobody's coming in saying, "Oh, I don't know photo. I don't know performance." They're coming in sensing and perceiving and then building towards a critical response at the end of observing. And I feel like, especially working with experimental photography, original processes, whatever you want to call them, they're very simple processes. And if you spend time in front of or with one of these works that you or I make, you can read each of our choices. They're all there. They're all available. Um, but there's a fear around a lack of literacy because you haven't done it with your own hands. And I think what was great about that crit was that it showed you didn't actually have to have that practice as part of your own in order to, you know, engage a kind of literacy and read it. Um, so the critique turned into a space of observation. And man, I have wished over time that like my shows could feel anything like that. I mean, most commercial gallery shows, you know, it's wonderful to get it up. And I love the experience of installing and opening a show, and then you get a review or two and some sales.
Oh,
And
yeah.
then, you know, I mean, this is the palette of appreciation that you can get with a show. Um, but that's it. You know, you don't really get that experience of feeling observed the way Mary Kelly is crit. And it's not like you want in an egotistical kind of way that, you know, just attention seeking. It's that there are choices available in the product that we share space with. And you're really hoping, I think, that other people are going to be able to follow those choices with you and um, you know, make the notes in their brain the way that if you were writing an essay in literature class, you would like write down page numbers where like trees burned or something so that you could write an essay and connect the dots. And yeah, so that's the most satisfying feeling is when you know you're in conversation with someone because you can really observe each other's movements across the page of their production, whether it's photographic or literary.
That sounds like a beautiful experience because I think, one is usually trying to communicate through their work and they're making thousands of little choices and having someone actually see them seems like what you were trying to say in your strangled voice. I have a practical question though. What kind of was the artist allowed to speak or give any kind of context before that crit began?
No, they weren't allowed to do that. And in my classes, I've taken a an evolved model. My first, we do three critiques in my courses that I teach. The first one is one that I generally have to lead more and try to ask questions of the students because they're not used to it. They don't come to critique with a lot of experience and so they're afraid to ask questions or make observations because it might feel like judgment. So I do ask a lot of questions about what they're seeing and what it relates to, whether it's album covers or movies or, whatever. And the second crit is, and so the artist doesn't speak as much in that crit because I want them to hear what other people are seeing. And the second crit, we do it silently. We just walk around and write about each other. And so at the end of that, everybody gets 15 pages of writing about themselves from each other. And I did it initially as a punishment. I was teaching at Otis, and my students were like,
Punishment.
my students were distracted. They were using their phones and like not sharing. And so I was like, okay, we're doing this crit silent. And I gave them all like clipboards with, and then it was so good because at the end of it, they felt what it was like to have that much attention paid to each of them. And they also felt how interesting it was to pay that much attention to their peers. And so I kept it. So I've kept it for like a long time, maybe 10 years. And then the third crit, the artist introduces, they talk about their intentions. So I feel like I try to build, I mean, these are undergrads. I don't even have grad students, but I would probably use an adapted model of this with grad students as well, although most things with grad students are more studio visit oriented. But yeah, the building towards a literacy around critical approaches is what I think school is for because they're accustomed to judgment. They're accustomed to like Yelp reviews, so like they want to think of this as like the teacher's going to judge it. Is it good or bad? Did I do a good job? Did they like it? And so the comments from peers will generally be what you see on Instagram, like they like it, and you want to move away from that. And it's good to know your instincts in terms of what you like and what you don't like, but um, that's not always, especially in a constructive context, the most important thing you can give back to the author, I think.
And
I
then,
don't think I quite answered the end of your question about where I've been showing because I talked about the commercial spaces that I
yeah, it was more about like what's the appropriate context to, all that stuff. Like I'd probably make something slightly different for a commercial gallery than I would if it was an institution because of just different considerations, even like size of the door into the building.
yeah. No, I have elected different kinds of spaces more recently. So a lot of the Cotton Project, I've done lectures at Harvard's Davis Center, which is a Eurasia Center, and I've shown some of the work in that context as well. Just because that's a context that can access the content against which I can test my apprehension of the content. And then now it will show probably again in the context of an institution in Amsterdam and in Uzbekistan. Subject facing contexts have been really important to me for the last 6 years as I've worked my way through new avenues. But there are parts of my heart that are missing, really being a part of conversations around material and photography. I mean, it is the actual language I bring to the table, even when my brain is learning about, um, you know, irrigation in the early 20th century. Like my actual contribution to fine art, is yes, to open up defaults in terms of what's been photographed and by whom, but also to open up conversations about the materials that have gone into that practice. And, sometimes I'll see a show that I feel like, oh, if I were still really in conversation with the curatorial network that's interested in photography and sculpture, or photography that it is cameraless, or any of the kind of more formal conversations, then that piece would have been good in that show. But I think I deliberately tend to pivot away from conversations that I'm too easily included in. Like uh, I began to reject shows at some point about cameralessness because I was like, that's not the point. That's not the
Mhm.
point. Like I love cameralessness. It got me more physical, but that's not the point. And so I kind of started to edit the story of my practice. And I think CVs should read like stories, it shouldn't just be a list. It should be like, what was this person thinking in 1996 versus 2006, and who were they talking to? I think that's the fun part about history, is like finding out how someone changed.
Oh, this is one I recently added. Have you ever like given a talk to MFA students and one of them asks you a super annoying question that is predicated on their unmade work of the future is better than everything you've done in the last 30 years?
That's so funny. I guess what comes up for me when you ask that is more, I think the 40s are such a really amazingly different time for me than the 30s. And, my practice necessarily evolved to adapt to all of the amazing changes of the last 6 or 7 years. And I meet women in their 30s, whose careers are just starting, um, who just don't get it. And I know I would have been them also when I was 28 to 38, saying like, oh, well, why is writing easier for you to do when you're like going from hospital to hospital? Like, or like, just like kind of not getting why you would take a break from commercial practice, or why you would slow down on a project. And I don't need to explain it to them, and I don't take their comments as rude. I know for a fact that when I was 10 years younger, I would have felt the same way. I literally remember being like, why didn't that person finish their dissertation? Or like, why have they taken 4 years between solo shows? Like, I didn't understand because I was pumping it out, and it felt good. And I liked getting a review on every show. I liked getting to know which institutions had begun to collect the work, and I wanted those strokes. Um, and you do have to store up a lot of strength to survive the periods when you're not seeking strokes. But yeah, I think the hubris of the MFA student, as you put it, or the 30 something, as I would experience it more recently, is a totally important part of your growth as an artist. You need to be going through a part of your life where you feel like there's more to achieve and you're going to get it. You have to see yourself as the rocket scientist in order to go take physics. Like, so whatever you can do to see yourself as still having something to achieve, hopefully you're not positioning that as an oppositional statement against whoever you're talking to, um, but also I understand if a younger artist is confused by the phase I've been going through. I think you asked the question, and you haven't brought it up yet, but you do ask the question about the most something important you'd like to share for the benefit
Yeah.
of your younger self. And
Yeah.
so I think I think that that's one of the things is I've never been afraid to leave the shore behind, to just sail out into a new paradigm and unmoor and get lost. However, I would look back and tell my younger self that I was brave and that that's great, and I would give myself some strokes, because you don't get a lot of strokes for that kind of stuff. But I would tell my younger self that patterns do start to emerge. And that, what may seem like totally losing sight of shore once will happen again, and you'll be able to pull threads through that you didn't anticipate. And so there's something about having that perspective as a maturing artist, that is it's part of the strength you build. It's part of the kind of exercise of it all is trusting that the brave moves you're making are gonna make sense. And they do. I really I see that in other people's work as much as my own, that departures from what seems safe tend to recur and amplify one another over time and make meaning. So they're worth it.
Yeah, you just gotta hang in there.
Yeah.
If you're able, then in time, the big picture sort of evolves. And it can be hard to stick with it. A lot of people like they can't keep making work or they take long breaks. So
Yeah. Yeah, I've always made artwork, even when I'm not showing it. And I think that it is true. You do have to kind of keep your nose on the scent. um, and not tell yourself that the only kind of artwork that you are making or could make is what you just did. Because then you might not recognize that the thing you're making is, artwork. And so, um, yeah, opening up your own kind of permission to yourself to include other practices can sometimes take the pressure off of periods when you don't want to make what you were just making.
oh, do you do like a non-art, just creative projects as a break? I mean, like making food, altering all your clothes, gardening.
No, but I think one of the things that I've noticed is when like just taking pictures comes back into my life. Um, like I don't have photographs of my life for huge parts of it. Huge parts of my life are totally unimaged because I'm making, another kind of photographic
Mm.
product. But when I began to caretake for my father, my mother, my sister, and my sister-in-law who died, and then her son, my nephew, um, I suddenly, I had an iPhone, and I don't know whether it was to dissociate or simply to amuse myself. And then I was taking pictures again constantly, and I just have like so many pictures from that part of my life, and they're not like, you know, conceptually, manufactured. They're good pictures. I mean, they're good pictures. But I think they would, if I were now to step back from them, because I'm not doing it anymore. It ended. That body of work matters mostly because you just don't see that in art. You just don't see women at midlife and how many people they take care of.
Yeah.
Especially if they chose not to get married and have kids, which it's my situation. I still ended up with all these wonderful people who I love and I'm blessed to take care of, if I can say that. But it's an unphotographed thing. The closest I can think of is like photographs of birth that you've seen recently in certain exhibitions, like childbirth or kind of vaginal display, or like certain ones of aging bodies of our own. So it's very much still a gaze on the female body in some of the artwork that I've seen photographically about this part of life, but not this other thing, which is like, oh, my mom writes on her thigh and when I give her showers, I can try to read it.
Wow.
It's really interesting.
Wow. Okay. That is amazing. I really appreciate talking to you. Such a like lovely person in so
Yeah.
many ways. Yeah.
You
Uh,
too. I'm so glad you started doing this. Do you feel like having started the art school is in your way a kind of an attempt to community build
yeah.
and yeah.
Yeah, I'm pretty isolated. There's a question on here that I have, this list and they're really just jumping off points, but one is about like feeling isolated and I definitely have been and we're pretty far apart, but we can have this nice moment together and I get so much like grounding and heartening from connecting with people and seeing we have so much in common. You and I have similar art practices, but all artists and then all creative people like a lot of like personality stuff in common. It's so great to like I really want us all to feel more connected.
Yeah.
Like me personally, yes, having this and then sharing it. And then there's just a bunch of information, also not having kids and not I don't teach formally, so I have all this information that I wanted to get down and put out there before I forget.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there are so many other models of teaching that I think I would like my later life to include, more Black Mountain School kind of model. Um,
Dream.
buy a farm in the Catskills, and you and I can go out there and give crits to like people who want to also make jam. Like, but for me, school mattered in terms of, jogging myself out of one milieu and entering another. In both cases, finding out that these professions are actually life paths you can take. But I don't think it's the only way to form community. And I think, especially after undergrad, students are always really depressed because they don't have that community, they don't have that attention that they had in school, and they need to find other ways to fabricate it, or they'll just attrition will happen. And then after grad school, the questions you've brought up are the same thing. You have to find ways to make community, and teaching is not necessarily it. I mean, you don't necessarily suddenly have the cohort you had when you were in grad school. So, yeah, I think it's great that you're doing this.
Well, I hope it's helpful. I really enjoyed talking to you, and I hope this is helpful to even one other person. Okay, I have taken a lot of your time, so just want to say thanks. I really appreciate it.